Hello and welcome to Recharge and Rise. I'm Emma Draycott, your host and founder of this experience, and I'm an anxiety and burnout freedom therapist and hypnotherapist. And I'm really excited and blessed to be sharing a conversation today with Emily. She's a business consultant, she's a strategist, specialist, and she specializes in anti-burnout strategies to support people with their business growth, with leadership, to work less with simpler strategists. So it sounds like an absolute dream and delight, doesn't it? So welcome, Emily. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to dive into this conversation.
Absolutely perfect. So the first thing I would love to ask you is what led you to be doing the work that you are doing now?
Yeah, so I started my career as a personal assistant to execs and CEOs, and I loved it. I loved being like the calm in the storm and being the person right by somebody as they're scaling and working on really exciting projects. But what I saw very quickly as my career progressed and I stepped into leadership roles and into project management was that everybody above me was just more stressed than me. And so the only route I could see forwards in my career was to pick up more responsibility and kind of a career that I loved, but also stress. And I really didn't want my career to be defined by the stress that came with it. And so I decided to go out on my own and redefine what my career meant to me. And I've been loving it ever since. So I started as a virtual assistant. I kind of dipped my toe into freelance work while I was still working my full-time job, and then quickly realized I was just like putting myself in a box that I felt I could do more easily rather than actually bringing my expertise from my career into my work. And so over the last couple of years, lots of confidence work later, I transitioned into being an online business manager, and now I help people with consulting and strategy so that they can scale without the burnout, scale without the stress that comes with those leadership roles.
Thank you for sharing that and also that insight that, and often in lots of people's positions, that is what, to progress, extra workload, extra stress is often what people see um, in their vision. So it's amazing to see that you saw that and was like, it's not actually what I want for myself, and saw a way out, because not everybody does see that way out, but of course there are. So I would love to start with talking about what success actually is and whether there is a bit of a trap in that word in itself.
Yeah, definitely. And this is usually the first thing that I work with clients on, because especially in the online world and the social media world that we live in, there's one version of success that we see visually. It's the stuff that we see people celebrating and shouting about, and there is a place for that, of course. It's incredible that we can share our journeys like this with other people, but sometimes that means that we have a view of success that is a little bit warped, and it's not necessarily what actually means something to us. And so the first thing that I do with any of my clients, no matter what capacity they're working with me on, is that we really start to define their version of success. And so that means take away the career, take away the job title, take away the business. What does success look like in your life? So what is that life filled with? What moments happen day to day? What does your schedule look like? What does your free time look like? Who are you spending time with? And often what comes up is none of the speaking on stage, selling loads of things, like making loads of money, living in, sometimes it's living in an amazing house, but because of the moments that are in it, the people that are in it, like the family that you keep in touch with. And there's even things that come up quite often, which is like, oh, I wish I would like kept in touch with my friends more, which is so simple. But if that's what a really successful and happy life looks like, why are we not prioritizing that? Why is that the thing that's coming at the bottom of the pile? And so, defining success based on a life and what a full life looks like first, and then deciding what career matches that and how we can achieve something in our career that fuels the life first. So it's flipping the script a little bit, because I think we're asked from a really young age, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like that's the question that we're asked, because that defines our success, but it really doesn't, because I've worked with business owners and people in their careers that have the job title but don't have the fulfillment outside of that. So yeah, we definitely got to flip the script a little bit.
As you were talking then, it reminded me, I remember once I was going for a management position, and a colleague asked me in a polite way, like, why are you going for that?
Mhm.
And it stopped me in my tracks a little bit, like, and it was just like to me it was automatic that I would want to progress, and that's what you did, or that, and I suppose you were just like highlighting that, and there are ways, aren't there, that we see other people doing, or there's a line of expectation maybe from others, from ourselves, and that it's living like it where it's not actually that intentional. And actually,
Mhm.
when I was asked that question, maybe I hadn't actually fully considered why I was. I just
Mhm.
did. And I always thought in that way, but it wasn't in that time. I was like, it's a really intentional question. So, and in terms of social media, thank you for bringing that up, because we do see all sorts of different pictures of
Mhm.
success, don't we? And it is interesting how much social media and what we see influences our thoughts and places expectations on us about what success is or what it looks like. But of course, we only also see one part. And it also, when you was talking, it made me think of, I've then I've seen figures or I've seen information. I've thought, wow, that sounds absolutely incredible. And then when I've had the privilege of being able to find out more about that information because I've met that person or something like that, I've been like, oh, that actually was quite misleading.
Yeah.
Not on purpose. They've not misled it on purpose. They've just shared it a
Mhm.
fact,
Mhm.
but I've interpreted that in a particular way, and I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
so interesting.
Yeah, I feel really lucky that at this stage in my career, and I think because of the roles that I had where I was able to see the not so pretty truth of success from quite early on in my career. I think I've always taken things like that with a pinch of salt. And I think that's what gave me maybe the confidence to say, like, okay, well, if I do go out and do something on my own, I'm not necessarily going to be comparing myself against the same standard because I'm in a different world now, different world to the job I was in. And I have the best seat in the house. And I say it all the time because I work side by side with people at the top of their game and their successes are incredible. But I see the hard work, the graft, the stuff that goes into it, the challenges, the problems, like the really difficult decisions that they have to make. And so I think it's really important that we think about the context, and it's not to minimize somebody's success or achievement, but it's to that's what why redefining success is important, because we need to drop the perfectionism and the feeling that those people that are ticking off those achievements are doing it, in a completely smooth sailing, like it's win after win after win. There will be so many challenges that they're facing and dealing with and putting up with that have got them there, and those are part of the journey too.
Yeah, and I suppose that when you see things without that context, people do feel inadequate. They feel like,
Mm.
well, why can't I do that? Or there's something wrong with me. And, there's lots of comparing. Do you notice for your clients or people that you speak to that people do compare themselves to others? And what advice do you give around that?
Yeah, I mean and to be honest, that never stops. I think it doesn't matter how far in the game you get. Comparison is like it's human nature, isn't it? And we will always do it. I think especially with social media, like it's going to happen. But what I always try to remind people to do is to think about their own context. So yes, we might not know the ins and outs of, say, for example, that person gets a new job or gets a promotion or launches something new in it does incredibly well. Unless they spill all the secrets and tell us the ins and outs, we're not going to know. But what we do know, what we can control, is what we know about us. So if we mark off our, not just the kind of the face value successes that other people might recognize, but categorize those small wins, like the moment where you get to sit with a cup of coffee in the morning, or the fact that you met up with your friends and kept in touch with them and had an amazing time, whatever it is, those like small wins in life, they need like recognizing as well. And so we can stop comparing if we fill that time instead with like gratitude for what we've got already, and we can kind of switch them around. But also I would say that like comparison is, it's human nature, and we shouldn't make ourselves feel bad for doing it, because it can also be a real like source of inspiration, and it's not a bad thing as long as we're not letting that comparison make us feel differently about ourselves. You can use it to fuel you in a great way, but it's when it becomes harmful because we're constantly over consuming is like a huge problem in business and life, because it means that we're absorbing everything everybody else is doing, and we're not doing what feels right for us.
Yeah, great point. And actually, that leads me on to ask you about, are there any particular habits that you see that do hinder people's successes? And I was actually going to ask the other way around as well, and what habits actually really help accelerate and support people.
I think a lot of this is around boundaries. So, like having really clear boundaries about our time and protecting our time. I've actually been speaking about this a lot this week. It seems to be coming up. But it's around really valuing your time as the asset that it is. And if you are spending a lot of your time scrolling on social media when it might not be very helpful, comparing to others, being overcritical of the work that you're doing, you're really like reducing the impact that you can have, because making a decision is better than spending forever making a decision because you're worrying about whether it's going to be right or wrong, because you'll learn from whatever choice you make anyway. Like you'll be collecting feedback as you go. So you're better off just making the choice, like making the call. And so if you're spending a long time mulling over decisions, over analyzing everything, being overcritical, scrolling forever to see what everybody else is up to, checking in with 10 people to kind of sense check your decision. If you've got to make an important decision at work, are you like going around the houses to check that everyone's going to be okay with it, or are you just making the call and being confident in it? And so I think boundaries around time isn't just, am I going to have a meeting about this, or are we going to, send a message back and forth? It's not just the stuff we're kind of told to protect our time over. It's our energy, it's our thought processes. Like, how can we get from A to B and make that decision quickly and move on, because there's something else that's more important, more valuable for us to be looking at.
Really, really good point. It's amazing how much time potentially people can spend in the thinking about it, the procrastinating about it. So it's great to obviously make a decision and move forward. Are there any inspirations that you can offer about how people actually do that when they're so used to procrastinating or worrying about it, or because they want things to be perfect?
Yeah, I think there are two things here. One is that even if you procrastinate over a decision, it doesn't necessarily mean you're still making the right one, because we can procrastinate for ages and we still don't know the outcome. Like, we just don't know. We've got to wait and see. And so I think accepting and getting really comfortable with learning, like any decision you make, whatever the outcome is, you're going to learn from it. And so if you prioritize that section of the move that you're making over the actual decision making bit, and realize that whatever happens in the future, you'll collect the evidence, you'll weigh up the pros and the cons, there'll be learning points, there'll be strengths, there'll be weaknesses. That's just life. Like, that is going to happen in every move that we make. It actually doesn't matter so much about the decision, it's what you do afterwards that counts. And I also think it's really important to, if you need a bit of a process, if you are like a process driven person, if you are quite logical and you don't necessarily, some people make decisions really based on their gut, they have an instinct and they kind of follow that, and that's great. But some people don't feel as confident tuning into that. And if that's the case, then set yourself a little bit of a process. So use a pros and cons list, do like a SWOT analysis. So look at your strengths, weaknesses, what are the opportunities, the threats. If you're a logical person, make it a logical decision, and it kind of almost removes the pressure from you then, because whatever that system spat out to you at the other end, you're going to go for it and just weigh up the result afterwards anyway. And I think part of this is removing the personal. Like, we're making decisions, but we're not robots, and so we can just deal with whatever happens afterwards anyway. There's very few messes in life that we can't like figure out and work out anyway.
It's interesting that often, especially when I work with people, that there's a right or a wrong, and that's how it's labelled. There's a right or the wrong decision, but actually it's flipping. And as I hear you talking, it's flipping that
Mm.
mindset to be like, there's a learning opportunity. So whatever way I choose, there's no right or wrong. We will get feedback and collect evidence from it. So that's interesting. And thanks as well for sharing the difference between, some people do make decisions using their feeling and gut intuition, but actually some people are very logical and need a process to, and so weighing things is good. So that's clearly a good habit. Well, it goes into both, doesn't it? It would be a not so helpful habit if it's procrastination, but a really helpful habit about taking decisions quickly and moving on those. What other habits do you see that really do help leaders?
So I think having a habit of sharing what's going on for you is a really helpful one. The leaders that I work with that feel kind of most at peace in their roles have lots of different ways of sharing what's happening for them. So whether it's a coach or a consultant or a mentor or somebody alongside them, whether it's friends, colleagues, people that they trust and support, or even their team, for example, it's people with open communication in multiple different channels. For me, when I watch them work and how they move, they feel the most at peace and comfortable, because like problem shared is a problem halved. So they can actually like let go of the weight. And I think what I see a lot in burnt out or overwhelmed women especially, I think it's that everything is up here, and they physically say to me like it feels like there's a lot here, like they're holding a lot on their shoulders. And part of having a good habit around managing your time is sharing what's happening. So I think if you have open communication with other people, can share what's happening in your day, in your week, what's causing pressure, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're like passing that problem to them, but it's that you're using your voice to like communicate, even if it means telling someone after you've made the decision. So I often used to do this with my manager. I wasn't necessarily asking for help because I didn't want him to make the decision for me. I wanted to make it, but I would check in and say, this problem came in, I decided to go with X, what do you think? Or like just letting you know. And it kind of took the weight off that I wasn't making all of these decisions and having to like, I had the weight of the world on my shoulders and I was going from one decision to the next and I felt like I was constantly fighting fires. It almost just let me release that, like, okay, I did that thing, I've handled it, but now you know, and we can chat about it if it was difficult.
Yeah, yeah, because and you only feel a lot more supported when you talk and have that open communication with other people, rather than that weight. And I hear people describe this
Mhm.
too. Obviously, that's a heavy load to hold on your own. So, what else do you think? Because you started to talk about burnout there. So, what else do you see contributes to burnout?
It's generally a, a real pressure that everything is your responsibility. And so that weight and that feeling that decisions, choices, responsibility, time is all on you. And so it's really difficult when somebody's in that space to, it's not as easy as just delegate, just like pass some of that work on to somebody else. It's really difficult because usually when somebody's themselves into that position, it's after a long time of holding a lot back and managing the processes on your own. Like you might do things a certain way when you turn up to work one morning, but if no one else knows how you do it, it's not as easy as just like passing that to someone that's offering to help you. And so what I often see with people that are burnt out is that it's not a simple fix of ask for help, because it's really difficult to ask somebody for help when everything you do is stored in your head and everything you're worrying about is on a mental to-do list. And it's because everything's up here and not out there. And so one of the main things that I work with people on is getting it out of their head and into some kind of system structure, even just on paper, so that it's less personal. It's not your personal burden. It's not part of your brain space. It's factual stuff that's happening, and it's not you. You're not attached to the burnout responsibility, and we can now do something with it. Now it's on paper.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So that can obviously work in your own business, especially for when
Mhm.
people are, they might literally be their business,
Yeah.
and it can feel very like you are the only person that knows certain things. So to actually, that would make a lot of sense of why that would help the person to feel unburdened. How do you see that working when you work with leaders who are employed?
Yeah, it's often that even if they have, for example, a team or people they can delegate to, there's often those minute things that are just theirs. They've just kept them as theirs and they haven't necessarily felt, maybe they're too small of a job, or no one else quite knows how to handle it quite like I do, or there's like a protectiveness over certain things. And it could be really tiny things like sending the meeting invite for the meeting because that's just, I set the meeting, so I'll send the invite. It's really silly little things, but if those things are taking up a big proportion of your time and you're mentally storing them, I think the biggest common thread is anything you mentally store that doesn't get written down, that doesn't get put somewhere. That builds up over time. And then all of a sudden you are out of work for the day, but you still have the mental list. And then you come back to work the next day and you've got to do something with it. And all of a sudden it's more difficult to go and ask Cheryl down the corridor to like do that thing, because every instruction manual is up here. So it's exactly the same as working in your own business. it's easy to understand in your own business because you create it from the ground up. You are the person that, you know, writes all the rules, and so it's really difficult to pass that on. But the same can happen in an employed setting where it's not necessarily even things that are on your job description. They're just things that you've picked up. You know, do you check in on someone when you walk in the morning? You've got to remember to do that. Do you go and pick up some paperwork from a certain place in the office, and if you were off, you'd have to say, yeah, it's on like the third drawer down, and it's like it's in that blue folder, I think, but maybe I didn't organize it, so just leave it, I'll do it when I get back. It's those things that are unwritten, and the more we get process driven, the more we can step away from the process and replace ourselves.
Okay, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that. And I know that when I work with people, I talk about it in terms of like holding responsibility for things that aren't necessarily their responsibility, but actually, like you say, they've collected that responsibility over time. They just do it. It just becomes taken for granted that they do it, but actually, it's take it's taking that time as well, isn't it? It's the investment in, teaching somebody else or sharing that or writing or putting it down, so that even though on that one occasion it would take longer to tell somebody how to do it, but longer term it's going to relieve you of responsibilities that aren't yours, and then also free up that headspace. Because it is really interesting, and energetically, if it isn't written down or systemized or organized in your diary, we do, don't we? We literally hold it in our head. That's why like people wake up in the middle of the night going, oh, I just need to do, because we're literally storing things, and we're constantly saying to our mind as well, don't forget, remember this. So we energetically are trying to still hold that information and keep it relevant so we don't forget as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the next thing I'd love to talk about is, so we've really talked about how you use your time, and people can easily see like doing a time audit would be really helpful. Like, where do you spend your time? What are you doing at the moment? What is within your responsibility? What isn't, that you could let go of? But also, if where you're spending your time is actually working towards the success that you define for yourself. Because really beautifully, as you said earlier, if that is really about having a cup of tea with your friend whenever you want to, or being able to have some spaciousness or time with your family, and that's how you define success. Like, are you spending your time in that way? And that will help you know whether you're living your own life intentionally towards your own success. So the thing I would like to talk about now is about energy and time. So, is there ways that women particularly can support their energy? Because so you've talked about or alluded to the fact that actually, as women, we are our greatest asset in our business, in our work, in leadership. So, how can we harness our energy?
Yeah, there are so many things here, and it's first of all, it's valuing you and your time and your energy. That's first off, because if we don't see ourselves as an important asset in whatever relationships we're part of, whatever kind of work settings, whatever projects we're working on, we're never going to prioritize that. And so, first of all, we've got to really see the value of us doing what we're doing. And when that happens, we start to categorize our most impactful jobs, our most impactful skills versus the things that could be us, could be somebody else, could be a robot. Like, we could be replaceable in those things. And that's not a bad thing, but it's that if, for example, you recognize that you communicating with people one-to-one is your skill set, that's your thing, it's where you shine. You managing a project is where you shine, or you being creative, whatever your work looks like. If you tier the types of things that you spend your time doing and put the ones that are the most valuable, that have to be you, at the top, that's where you should really be concentrating your hardest work, like the biggest proportion of your work. The things that get lower down the list, that they're not what you're great at, or you don't really enjoy doing them. That might be, for example, like admin, firing off emails, or like, I don't know, getting organized with your finances. Those are the things to look at first of all, to either delegate or get some support with, whether it's a system, a piece of tech, or somebody else to help you with. And when you do that, you free yourself up to focus on the bits that are going to have real impact towards working towards those successes that we mentioned, the bits that are going to really propel you forwards. And when you do that, I'd also really recommend that people look at their calendar and look at their schedule in a time block. Because if we can look at the time that we have available and actually prioritize those things, so whether it's a creative project or prioritizing speaking, guest speaking, being the expert, if that's what's going to propel us forwards and it's what we're best at and it's what we want to be kind of known for, we need to be prioritizing that in our calendar and schedule. Otherwise it's just going to fill up with all the other bits at the bottom. So I would really recommend looking at your week and being really realistic about the time that you have. We often find that we overestimate what we can do in a day, but we underestimate what we can do in a year. So when we set goals for the next year, we'll go, oh, I might not be able to manage that, or like that's a bit lofty, maybe I'll like knock that down a peg or two. But then we look at the day and we have a to-do list like 4 pages long, and we feel rubbish at the end of it when we didn't tick it off. And it's like we need to switch the roles here, because in a day there are only so many hours. But across a year, we can do a huge amount if we're spending those hours on impactful activities. So I would really recommend laying out your week, put life stuff first. So if you've got to do the school run, if you go and see, go to the yoga every Tuesday, whatever you've got in the diary that is already life stuff, that goes first. And anything that's non-negotiable that can't move, maybe it's meetings that are fixed, things that have to be there. And then on top of that, layer the stuff that is your zone of genius, the stuff that you really shine at, the stuff where your energy is best placed. And that should give you stuff that can kind of be pushed aside, delegated, whatever you need to do with that. But the other thing that we've spoken about before is around really harnessing your energy in a way that suits you and your body and how you operate. And that means being quite in tune with yourself. And so that can take a little bit of time and reflection. It doesn't happen straight away for people. But I would really recommend keeping a bit of a diary across a couple, maybe a month or longer, and recognizing when your energy dips and doesn't. It might be around your cycle, it might be around the time of the day. So for me, I know that I wake up with quite a lot of energy first thing. Once I've like actually got up, I don't want to get out of bed to start with, but once I am out of bed, I have like a sprint of a couple of hours where I'm kind of on fire, and other people haven't necessarily woken up yet. Like my clients haven't got up, they're not necessarily asking me things, so I can fire through a couple of hours of admin. And then for the rest of the day, I can be focusing on one-to-one conversations, and I can finish earlier, because that's how my day fits and it's how my energy fits. And so for other people, I have clients that work really well in the evening. They're like a night owl and they get loads of creative energy in the evening. And so if they're ever working on an exciting project, they'll do it in the evening. Now, I know this is more difficult if you work an employed role where you're more fixed with the timings, but even if you can dictate your schedule that much, it's about giving yourself forgiveness and permission when you're not feeling at 110%, but also really going in when you do. And if you feel that energy, lean into it, because we're not robots, so we need to go with where we actually feel good.
Definitely. And I think a lot of the times, because of like rigidness potentially, or expectations of ourselves or others, we might force ourselves to do something. So for example, if I was to do a creative project and I'm in employment, and this is the time I've got to do it, but I'm not feeling creative, forcing myself to do that project is not actually going to serve me or the work. So being flexible within that, and advocate. I would say advocate for yourself. If you're in employment, advocate for yourself. And actually, if you work better later, maybe there is a bit of flexibility to our schedule. And I do think that a lot more employees are, I do think there's a lot more flexibility. And at the end of the day, then they're getting the best out of, you're producing the best. I also love, and I saw it as a list in my mind, like the things that you're good at and the things that light you up and bring you joy, and then the other tasks at the bottom. It's thinking, what can I do about this? Can I delay this? Can I delete it? Can I delegate it? Can AI do it? Can tech do it? Can somebody else do it? Because amazingly, our days can easily get like filled with that stuff potentially, can't it? And then then that's going to really impact on how fulfilled we feel in our work as well, because we're not getting to those parts where we really feel like we're in our zone of genius. I nearly switched those two letters around, so I'm not quite sure how that was going to come out. So what about so are there any other kind of quick wins that you see that really help people boost their productivity without working more? That's a key bit.
Yeah, so one thing that always surprises me that people don't do, because, and I think maybe it's my background and career in just like being as efficient as possible all the time. But one of the best things that we can do, because sometimes we can't get rid of those tasks that are maybe a bit more repetitive, sometimes we have to do them. That's life sometimes. But if we can template or make things repeatable as much as possible, we're going to save the energy, because sometimes it's just a time task. Like sometimes it just needs to be ticked off, but it doesn't need to take away from our energy reserve. So if you imagine like our battery being full and we want to save that battery for the stuff that I said that lights you up, that's where you're in that zone of like being, being in your best place and working towards like a huge goal. If we want to be able to do that, then we need to reserve our battery. And if you, for example, have to send emails quite regularly around the same thing, the same topic. In business, it might be like sending a proposal to somebody, or replying to them after they've booked a call with you. Or in work, it might be a catch up with a one-to-one, whoever it is that you need to speak to. Do you have that templated and just saved so you can copy and paste it? Do you have them saved somewhere? So if you are literally running on empty, you've got to the end of the day and you need to send it off, it's not going to take any brain space for you to type that email out. And this can be the same for anything. It doesn't even have to just be emails. But if you do something repeatedly, can you automate it happening? So if you, for example, need to get in touch with your accountant every month, put it in your calendar. Don't just expect yourself to remember that you're going to do it. So whatever you can do to save your future self from having to think, do, exert any energy, the better. And so that means templating, writing processes down, and just making it easier for yourself in the future.
That sounds dreamy, to be honest. And I definitely know that, especially in the past, when working in fast-paced, high-stress environments, which I know that a lot of people that I work with relate with, and I'm sure yourself as well, it's amazing that drive, you don't end up spending the time doing a template. You're just like, I'll just quickly do it. It's almost like, when we're in that stress response, there isn't necessarily that forward thinking or planning.
Yeah.
And I think we can get caught up in that when we are quite stressed. Just the last question I'd love to ask you is about email
Mm-hmm.
and email management, because I'm not sure about yourself, but the amount of emails that can come up in one day for clients that I work with, myself,
Mm-hmm.
and how you advise to best manage that, really. I'd love your insights on
Yeah.
this one.
The first thing, emails are a big one, because the first thing to remember is that if we're in a stressful position or we are stressed at work and emails coming in are giving us more work, we are going to have a stress response to receiving them and seeing those notifications pop up, because it's just more message that like there's more to do, there's more to do, there's more to do. And so if you can turn your notifications off, I'd really recommend not having them on your phone. If you can separate work and life in whatever way possible, and when you've logged into your laptop, that's when you look at your emails. When you're not on your laptop, you're not in work mode. I know it's different for everybody and that their roles, but try and have notifications off, even if it's just I turn my notifications on and off in and out of work time, so that when I'm working, I can get them. When I'm not, I'm not. So first thing is just like recognizing why it's stressful. Sometimes it feels like this is such a bottom of the pile thing. Why am I stressed about emails? It's normal. The other thing is I would really recommend having set times that you answer your emails in the day. It depends on your job as to how often you're going to need to do that. For some people, I've worked with execs and leaders that check their emails once a day, and they do it every morning, and they clear their inbox, and then they don't check them again till the next day. Because and if something was urgent, they would ring them. If something was that urgent that they really needed a response right away, they wouldn't email. And so if you can do that, really try to. I know it might feel uncomfortable because you might be the type of person that responds straight away all the time, but do you need to respond straight away? And are you dropping everything to check your emails? Because if you are, if you're breaking away from really important work to fire off emails, then you're prioritizing that and saying that is your job, not the important stuff. So that's the first thing, kind of around boundaries. But if you don't have a good email management system, I would really recommend the 4D system. I don't know if anyone has heard of this, but you essentially do, delete, delegate, or defer. So if you can delete it. You just delete it, because there's no point in it sitting there if it's not serving your purpose. If you can also combine this with unsubscribing every time you delete an email that you realize you're not going to need any ever again, please just unsubscribe, because that cluttered inbox is not helpful for you. If you need to do it then. Set yourself like a morning email like session where you do this. You categorize everything into the 4Ds, and that's when you reply and you get them ticked off. If you need to delegate it right away and get it off your plate. And if you need to defer it, that's usually if there's a project behind it. So say, for example, I'm planning an event at the moment and I've got event planning time kind of blocked into my schedule so I can really focus. If an email comes in about my event, I want a bit of time to think about it. And so I've popped it in the defer folder. I'll come back to it when that time's scheduled. I'm not going to break away from my morning to get into event planning, because I'll just have to break away. And so sometimes project work does need a little more time, but my morning is usually me trying to get to inbox zero, and I try not to look at my email again until either towards the end of the day or the next day.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I think the concept of that email zero, I'm like, it's a dream.
But also don't pressure yourself to do it, because sometimes it's not possible and emails will keep coming in. It's the same concept that like our to-do list is never going to end. So why are we chasing it being ticked off? Because unless we're retiring and like stopping working, and even then there'll be like house admin and there'll be life stuff. So like we're never going to have a clear to-do list, because there's always stuff to do, and that's a great thing. That's fun. Like there's a lot of really good stuff that comes up. But chasing inbox zero is kind of pointless, because there's just going to be another email that comes in. But if we can at least clear the decks in the morning as much as possible to relieve that pressure, that's great.
Yeah, definitely. I think mine in particular comes from, people that it's spam, but it's
Mm-hmm.
still, some of it still gets through, and it looks like clutter. And I know there is that saying, when it's like having a tidy house or office space. And that is actually something I do think really links with productivity as well for people as well, because often our space around us does have an impact energetically on us, doesn't it? So thank you so much for these conversations. Really, really helpful. Is there anything else that you want to share before we come to the end of our conversation today?
I don't think so, apart from just that I really appreciate why people feel overwhelmed when in the world that we live in. But even though these might feel like small wins, they really do make a big difference. And they're the difference between a lot of people that I work with feeling overwhelmed and burnt out at work and not, even though they're very quick wins. And so I'd really encourage you to like sit and think, and like we said, spend that time doing it now for future you. It might feel like the week that you decide to write everything down is a busy week. I get that, but the following week will be easier. So I'd really recommend doing that. And if people want to check out I've got a weekly plan. It's an editable weekly schedule, so they can have a go at time blocking, and they'll have access to that as well.
Then that's your free gift.
Yeah.
Amazing. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. So, a reminder for those that haven't already accessed my free gift. So, my free gift is a 3-day experience with me where I will be sharing your freedom formula from anxiety and burnout. So, check that out. So, Emily, thank you so much for these conversations. Really, really helpful. And I love that they are simple. When we are already like overwhelmed or people are feeling stressed, we don't need complications. It's simple things just to help us to feel like we're in control of our life and not burdened by our work, so that we don't get to the point of burnout. And guests, thank you so much for being here, listening, for sharing your time and sharing this space with us, and for putting yourself first. And I look forward to seeing you on another video. So thank you so much, Emily,
Thank
and
you.
bye for now.